Today we'll talk about another very important Victorian poet, about Robert Browning. We will talk about the dramatic monologue and, of course, the poet which I just mentioned, Robert Browning. You probably remember that the 19th century was not the century of poetry, was a century of the novel. But however, poetry did not die out after the 18th century, about the Romantic period, but Victorian poetry continued Romantic poetry on new coordinates. This gives us the first tendency of the age. More exactly, that the poetry continued the main ideas of Romanticism, but of course trying to adapt them to the Victorian age. The names associated with this tendency are Matthew Arnold and Alfred Tennyson. The second tendency of the age is more with the realism of the age, trying to cope with the main world outlook, more exactly with the discoveries of science and with a need for objectivity and balance. So, in this case, poetry tried to show in itself the contemporary tendencies. It is not very easy to adapt poetry to an age of realism and to realistic representation, but you will see in the poet of Robert Browning how he managed to do that. And the third tendency of the age is a sort of a comeback to Romanticism. It is a so-called idealistic reaction, because they realize the fact that talking about cities, about factories, about chimneys, about railways was not very poetic. So instead, they needed something else to talk about. So we talk about rediscovery of emotion. We speak about dreamy fairylands, about tendencies, and of course the rediscovery of imagination and sensibility. The name of the poets associated with this tendency can be grouped around the pre-Raphaelite movement, and the most important name is Dante Gabriel Rossetti. So having these tendencies in mind, let us move on to the poet who best represented the age. And his name is Robert Browning, and you can see his portrait in front of you. Robert Browning was a very learned man, like George Eliot, the author of so many novels. Robert Browning was the representative of a more intellectual tradition. His father had a very big library, and Robert Browning read very many of these books. So that is why reading his poetry is not sometimes very easy, because he makes very frequent references to knowledge previously known, to certain titles, to mythology, to very well-known names. So that is why understanding Robert Browning poetry has to go hand in hand with education. Robert Browning was very much interested in moral problems. This was Victorian, but also in political problems at the same time. So I told you that to a very large extent, he tried to associate his poetry with some of the tendencies of the age. This is the moment when we can speak about the presence of such tendencies in the so-called moralizing aspect of his poetry and in the discussion of certain political problems. The age was characterized by several scientific discoveries and activity of sciences. One of them was psychology, and you probably remember that another very well learned writer of the age, George Eliot by her name, was also a writer who tried to apply psychology to his characters to motivate the behavior of her characters by speaking about their psychology. This is something that we also find in Robert Browning's poetry. So, in very many cases, he tries to speak about the psychology of the character. His poetry is not personal. He doesn't speak about himself. He tries to speak about other people. He tries to speak about what's going on in the mind of other people. And he is the writer of the age who exploited, we can say wonderfully, and excessively to a certain extent, a dramatic monologue. So that is why when we say Robert Browning, we say dramatic monologue, and the other way round. Robert Browning had a very special love affair with Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was confined to her home, and her father never allowed her to leave her home. So that is why, after meeting Robert Browning, they continued a very platonic relationship by not visiting each other, but by writing a lot of letters to each other. Finally, the two decided to get married, but the father was, of course, against this marriage. So Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barry Browning decided to elope in a very, very romantic trip to Rome. Elizabeth Barry Browning is the author of several volumes of poetry, and several critics are of the opinion that during her lifetime, Elizabeth Barrett Browning was better known than Robert Browning himself. The collection of poems that made her very famous and that still keep her in one of the four places in in English poetry is sonnets from the Portuguese. Sonnets from the Portuguese, sonnets as if she had found these sonnets in an ancient Portuguese manuscript and she translated them into English. We do not have the intention to speak about her sonnets from the Portuguese, but I do have one example, one of the most beautiful love poems of the Victorian age. How Do I Love Thee is the name of this sonnet, and Sonnet 43. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight. For the ends of being and ideal grace, I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely, as men strive for right. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. I love thee with a passion put to use in my old griefs, and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose, with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. This is a love poem, as you can see, and this is very, very personal. Such things you will never find in the case of Robert Browning. I told you that Robert Browning is closely associated with the dramatic monologue because he cultivated the dramatic monologue to the extreme, we can say. He called it in several ways dramatic lyrics or dramatic romances. But it doesn't matter how he called them. We have to have in mind the almost perfection of his compositions. In the case of Robert Browning, his dramatic monologues are of two kinds. The first one is soliloquies without an interlocutor. In the dramatic monologue, we have a character, usually a man, who opens his mind, who has a problem, who opens his mind and confesses in front of an audience. The audience is hushed. The audience will never say a word. In the first case of dramatic monologues, as I told you, we do not have an interlocutor. And examples are Porphyria's Lover or Soliloquy of the Spanish Cloister, among the best known such dramatic monologues. The second type is monologues with a silent interlocutor. So we do have a speaking person, a voice, and next to this voice there is an interlocutor who is the receiver of his confession, but he will be silent. He will never say a word. But of course, we can guess that there is an interlocutor from the reactions that he has. Among the poems that we can mention is My Last Touches, Fra Lippo Lippi, and Andrea del Sarto. What I would like you to keep in mind is that in the case of Robert Browning's dramatic monologues, we have the speaker, we have a speaker who's opening his mind in a moment of crisis. So he does have a psychological problem in very many cases. The speaker even has a psychiatric problem, a medical problem, because we can guess that behind this man there is a distorted psychology. And the main idea in the case of dramatic monologues is to show his consciousness, the realm of consciousness, in full light, to make it known to the audience in front of him. So keep in mind that unlike Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who's speaking about herself, about her feelings, Robert Browning doesn't speak about his own feelings, but very, very rarely, in just a handful of poems. In all the other cases, he speaks about somebody else's mind, about somebody else's sufferings, and somebody else's feelings. Let's take some of his most important poems one by one and try to see what they are about. The first one I'd like to talk about is My Last Touches. And this poem is a dramatic monologue, of course, with an interlocutor. The speaker of this poem is the Duke of Ferrara, who really existed, Alphonse II of Ferrara, and he's speaking about his wife who died, the Duchess, and on the right-hand side you have her portrait, Lucrezia de' Medici, and she was made a Duchess by Alphonse II of Ferrara. You have to know that Elizabeth Barry Browning, you probably remember, and Robert Browning visited Italy. And there Robert Browning was deeply influenced by Italian Renaissance. So don't be surprised if very many of his poems are associated with that age and with Italian history and with Italian realities, nobility. This is our case. Now, the background is that the Duke of Ferrara, who's now a widow, he decides to get married, and he would like to get married to the daughter of the Count of Tyrol. But the Count of Tyrol, before allowing his daughter to get married to the Duke, sends an emissary, an ambassador, to visit the Duke of Ferrara, and try to find out what kind of man he is. So my last touches is a kind of presentation of the Duke of Ferrara made by himself in front of the Count of Tyrol's emissary. But don't forget that the emissary is the interlocutor, and according to the rules of the dramatic monologues, interlocutors are always silent. So let's see some of the most important moments of this poem. So one day, the emissary arrives to the Duke of Ferrara's court, and he is visited by him upstairs to a very special room where behind some very thick curtains the Duke kept the portrait of his deceased wife. Don't forget that he is a widower. And so, that moment, the Count starts the presentation of his wife. That's my last touches painted on the wall. Of course, we're talking about a painting. Looking at as if she were alive. I call that piece of wonder. Now, Frau Pandolf's hand, probably Frau Pandolf was a monk, and this is very important because monks were not allowed to have any relationship with a woman. So Frau Pandolf's hands work busily a day, and there she stands. Well, please sit and look at her. From the very beginning, we can guess some of the personal characteristics of the Duke when he says, please sit and look at her, sit down and look at her. So he likes giving orders very, very happily. I said Fra Pandol by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turned. So practically no one saw the portrait. If they wanted to see the portrait, they had to ask me if I agreed that they could see the portrait. Back to the poem, see none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I. We see from the very beginning that he is very possessive. He is very selfish. Not only does he like to give orders, but he also wants the other people to obey his orders and to make sure that everybody understands who's the master, himself and no one else. So the Duke got married, but there was a problem. The Duchess, his wife, was a very, very popular woman. She was not reserved at all. She was very friendly. She was talking to everyone. She was smiling at everyone, something which didn't please the Duke at all. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere, sir. It was all one. My favor at her breast. Probably this was a very, very expensive brooch. My favor at her breast. The drooping of the daylight in the west. The bough cherry some officious fool broke in the orchard for her. The white mule she rode with round the terrace. So all the other objects around her were of the same value as the very, very expensive brooch she was wearing at her breast. All and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked man. Good, but thanks somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. So for every object that she received, she thanked the person who gave it to her. She was very friendly and very open. But of course our Count is jealous because all the little objects, like for instance the bough of cherries, or a white mule, or anything that she was given, was placed on the same plan with his very, very expensive brooch, and this is important, my gift of a 900 years old name. I made her a duchess. I gave her the title of a nobleman, and this was equated with anyone else's gift. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. But who passed without much the same smile? That started being a problem, because she smiled at everyone. She was friends with everyone. As I told you, she was very, very popular. And our Duke was a very, very jealous man. And he was not very happy with this. This grew, he says. I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. This grew, so this continued being like this, keep on smiling and being friendly and thanking everyone. So I didn't like this. I gave commands, and something happened. The result of that was that all smiles stopped together. What might have happened? We don't know. This is one of the moments of semantic gaps. One of several semantic gaps that we find in Robert Browning's poems, in which we are not given all the information. We have to guess. We have to fill in with our guesses. What happened? We don't know. He might have ordered her to be killed. She might have been sent to her parents. She might have been sent to a convent. We don't know where she disappeared, but what's important was that she died afterwards, and there she stands, as if alive. There she stands, as if she were alive, but she's not alive, but she's alive in the portrait. What is very important is that the portrait doesn't smile, that the portrait is not everybody's friend. The portrait is only an object that belongs to the Duke. Will please you rise? We'll meet the company below. So again, giving orders. So it is from these words that we can infer the existence of an interlocutor. So finish it was sit down now, get up, and we'll go together down, sir. You will go with me. I will not allow you to remain here with the portrait. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse. Um, this is probably a rarity, a huge monument, kind of a homage to his masculinity, kind of a homage to his being a nobleman. It's a rarity which Klaus of Innsbruck can't embronze for me, and for no one else, but for me. So if we read the poem very carefully, although the poem is about the Duchess, My Last Duchess is the title, we can guess that very much of the information which is given to us is about the Duke. We understand the way the Duke is from the words that he utters in this poem. Let's try to move on to another poem, a very well-known one, Porphyria's Lover. Porphyria's Lover is a soliloquy, so this time we only have a speaker, and the speaker doesn't have a name. It's just Porphyria's Lover. And the situation in which we find this time is that one night, it was a rainy night, Porphyria comes home late. Now, what follows is a jewel of a poem, which is divided into 5 parts, each one associated with an attitude. The first one is the setting, and the setting, of course, triggers an attitude, sentiments, feelings. So the first part is a kind of an introduction. We are told about the setting. The rain set early into night. The sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite, and it is worse, to vex the lake. So it is a very stormy evening. It's raining, the wind is blowing, and it is a very dark evening. And of course, it is very ominous. Something is about to happen. And what actually happens is in part two. Well, the poem is not divided into these parts. We're just dividing it in order to explain it better. So at a certain moment, Porphyria comes back home. I listened with heart fit to break when glided in Porphyria. Straight she shut the cold out and the storm, and kneeled and made the chilly's grate blaze up, and all the cottage warm. So she comes back home. Where does she come home from? We don't know. It is again one of those moments of semantic gaps. It is one of those moments when we have to guess, when we have to fill in. Where was she? We don't know. Maybe she visited her parents. Maybe she was with a friend. Or she might have been with another lover. Well, it is not so important what we think. What is very important is what our speaker thinks. Because what follows in the poem is his attitude generated by what he thinks. She comes in and she tries to be very friendly, to make the cottage warm, to set up the fire, and to adopt a very friendly attitude. And with this, we get to part three, which is preparation for what is about to happen. Which done, she rose, and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and lit her soiled gloves by, untied her hat, and let the damp hair fall. So she's taking off her clothes, which is a very intimate gesture. She sat down by my side and called me. When no voice replied, she put my arm around her waist and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping, made my cheek like there, and spread all o'er her yellow hair, murmuring, how she loved me. Of course, it is a moment of preparation for the love-making which is about to happen. She tries to be friendly, she tries to show the man that she is only his, and to show him very, very openly that she loved him. But now, the result of this preparation, the result of whatever is happening, triggers the next attitude. I knew Porphyria worshipped me. The moment she was mine, mine fair, perfectly pure and good, I found a thing to do, and all her hair in one yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around, and strangled her. No pain felt she. I am quite sure she felt no pain. So you see, something absolutely unexpected happens. This man strangles his lover with her hair. It is a moment when he is absolutely certain that she loves him, and she is only his. And this is the moment that he decided to to make her his own for the rest of his existence. We have to speak about a similar moment in the case of My Last Duchess, because the Duke, by having her painted, immortalizes her forever. Here we have a dead body, and the dead body will now go out and will stay like that forever. Of course, we speak about a distorted psychology because what the man says, no pain felt she. I'm sure she felt no pain. I wearily opened her lids again and untightened next the dress about her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, with droops upon it still, the smiling rosy little head. She guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard. So in his mind he thinks that she would like to be only with him and not with anyone else. So this is a very dangerous moment because, well, paradoxically, she is immortalized by being killed. What is the result? The result is that she will never be able to leave. She will stay like that forever, and thus we sit together now, and all night long we have not stirred. And yet God has not said a word. This last line of the poem is very important. This last line of the poem says a lot about whatever is going on here, whatever is going on in the mind of this man, whatever dangerous game he's playing, a kind of hide and seek with God, a kind of, now God, I sinned, now you punish me. But God never said a word. So practically, he challenges God. If you are there, if you exist, show yourself and punish me as you say you would. This is an explanation. This is a result of probably the crisis of belief of the age, because in very many instances, the existence of God um, might have been questioned. A very interesting aspect of this poem is the fact that we don't know if these things really happened, because we only have one speaking person. We don't have a second one. So probably these things never happened. Probably Porphyria never arrived home. Probably he never killed her. Probably she was not his love. Probably he just dreamed she would be his love and she wanted to make sure that she would be her love forever and immortalize her in this way. So the question arises is, did this really happen? Did it really happen? Sorry. And of course, we cannot say yes or no because we again lack information. Another poem I'd like to speak about is associated with the Renaissance. It is associated with Renaissance and the period before Renaissance. Now, Robert Browning was a fervent visitor of certain exhibitions. So, what he discovered there was some characteristics of Italian Renaissance painting. In pre-Renaissance times, whatever was painted was not the body of humans. The accent was not on the body. Of course, I'm referring to religious painting. So the accent was not on the body, but on the soul. The body was just something to wrap the soul in it. So if you look at the painting, the Annunciation, you see it is the Annunciation that Virgin Mary would bear a child. You see that the two figures, that the two faces, the man and the woman, look very, very similar. We cannot even say who of them is the man and who of them is Virgin Mary when she is told that she would become pregnant with Jesus Christ. They are of the same height. The background is not important. The clothes they wear are not important. The characteristics of their faces and of their body is not important. Again, because the accent always fell on the inner side. of man, his soul. But then Italian Renaissance arrived, and a painter like Leonardo da Vinci painted the same scene. Now, if you look at the painting on the right, you see how different the two are. You see that the background is very important. You see that the background is luminous. And it is luminous because it is the Annunciation, the fact that the Messiah will be born in 9 months. You see the angel, you see Virgin Mary, and all of them have human faces, human bodies, human skin, human legs, human heads, and everything. Because in the case of Renaissance, whatever counted was not so long the soul, not so much the soul, but the body. The fact that we were born with a body, and the body was the wrapper of the soul, but the body was, of course, very important. I'm telling you all of these things because the next poem, this one, Fra Lippo Lippi, is about the same topic. Fra Lippo Lippi really existed. He was a Renaissance painter of the 15th century who was found, he is found in a very important book mentioned by Giorgio Vasari, the lives of the most eminent painters, sculptors, and architects. So he decided to write about Fra Lippo Lippi in a dramatic monologue with an interlocutor. Fra Lippo Lippi was a monk, but Fra Lippo Lippi was also a human being. So sometimes he felt like leaving his convent and tried to visit the ladies, the sportive ladies, as he calls them. You can imagine what kind of sportive ladies they were. So after visiting them, he returns home to his monastery, to his convent, and he meets the guard. He is stopped by the guard, who takes a torch and pushes it to his face. So it was curfew time. So he was not allowed to be on the streets. So he has to give the guard an explanation. So Fra Lippo Lippi is in fact the explanation which he is giving the guard. So the speaker is Fra Lippo Lippi himself, and the interlocutor is the guard. He speaks about how he grew up. He speaks about how he was educated. And of course, he speaks about his painting. And at a certain moment, he speaks about this dichotomy between soul and body. So, this is the moment when the poem turns into a kind of ars poetica. Because the church says, and I quote, "Your business is not to catch men with show, with homage to the perishable clay. But leave them over it, ignore it all. So ignore the flesh because it's perishable clay. Ignore it all. Make them forget there's such a thing as flesh. Your business is to paint the souls of men. So don't paint the body, but paint the soul. Your business is to paint the souls of men, man's soul. And it's a fire, smoke? No, it's not. It's vapor done up like a newborn babe. In that shape, when you die, it leaves your mouth. So it doesn't matter the shape that the soul takes. Paint the soul and do not paint the body. But of course, for very many Italian painters, the bodies also counted. This is the situation with Fra Lippo Lippi. This is the situation with Michelangelo. So practically, they drew their inspiration from real life. They try to get the bodies and the faces from living people around them. So they practically use them in order to give body to these religious beings, to the saints, to the angels, even to Jesus Christ or to Virgin Mary. the situation with our painter. But let us continue with what the church is teaching him. It's well, what matters talking? It's the soul. Give us no more of body than show soul. Here's Giotto with his saint praising God. That's it, a praising. Why not stop with him? Why don't you imitate Giotto? Why put all thoughts of praise out of our head with wonder at lines, colors, and what not? So why do you have to bother about bodies, about lines, about colors? No, take care of the soul. Paint the soul. Never mind the legs and arms. Well, that's exactly what Renaissance painters were trying to find. Legs and arms and bodies and faces in order to be able to paint them. Filippo Lippi is a Renaissance man, so this is of course his tendency. So if we look at this painting is called the Holy Family. And during the Holy Family, we have a collection of saints. We have a collection. We have Virgin Mary. We have angels. Practically all of them are taken from the people living in the streets. But it's even more than that. In a certain corner, which you see in the circle, there is the shape of a man, the face of a man. And Fra Lippo Lippi put himself in the painting. So not only did he paint other people as holy faces and bodies and holy characters, but he also painted himself in the corner of a painting. And let us have a look at him. So here he is, bigger than that. And next to him, there is an inscription. And if you look at the inscription, it says, Iste perfecit opus. This is the man who made this work, who painted this painting. So in a way, he wanted to show everybody that I'm the guy. I'm the one who painted all of these people. I put myself in it because I am also important. Well, this is not presumptuous. It also happens today because very many painters sign their paintings so that everybody should know who's the author of the painting. I'm the man, says he. Back I shrink. What is this I see and hear? I, caught up with my monk's things by mistake, my old serge gown and rope that goes all around. I, in the presence, this pure company. So who I'm not a very important person. I'm in this presence, in this pure company, was a hole, was a corner of escape. Then steps a sweet angelic sleep of a thing, forward puts after a soft palm, not so fast, addressing the celestial presence. Nay, he made you, and devised you after all, though he's none of you. 'Cause St. John there draw, his camel hair made up a painting brush, we come to Brother Lippo for all that. Iste perfecit opus. So no, he's also important. He's immortal. But he made you, he painted you, so he is practically your creator. So here you have the Ars Poetica, the painter as the creator of art, the painter as a creator of existence. Another book, because actually this is a very big book I'd like to refer to, is called The Ring and the Book. You have to know that Robert Browning liked very much to go to the hidden markets and bookstores to find all kinds of stories and even crime stories and murders. And it's uh, may have he may have found the story that he put in The Ring and the Book in one of the bookstores in Florence in 1860. The ring in the title may have several meanings. Robert Browning gave Mrs. Browning a ring, so probably it is the ring that he gave Mrs. Browning. It might also be the work of a goldsmith, a very precious thing, a ring that marks uh, the marriage. And it is also, a ring is circular, so where it ends, it also begins. So we have the circular structure of the work. The book is practically a collection of dramatic monologues, very many, very long, very difficult to read today. But we find a story of Pompilia, who was a woman who was married by Count Guido Franceschini for money. But very soon he found out that she was not so very rich after all. So he wanted to get rid of her, to try to marry somebody else. But don't forget that we're in Italy, and Italy is Catholic, and in Catholicism there is no divorce, except in two situations. Either is your wife an adulteress, or she dies. So he tries to stage an adulterous scene, and he finds a lover for her, the priest Caponsacchi. Well, the two were very good friends, but they never thought of being lovers. But Count Guido Franceschini accuses her of being his lover. Sorry, the priest Caponsacchi's lover, to commit fornication, and he accuses her, but he cannot prove this. So he tries to um, find the two in the midst of a hot scene, but he cannot do it. So he decides to go to the second situation. He kills her, but he is discovered by the police, and he is imprisoned, and the book is practically his trial. So here we have a lot of dramatic monologues. Pompilia cannot have a dramatic monologue because she's killed. But we have Guido Franceschini, we have the priest Caponsacchi, we have several other witnesses, even the Pope. And the Pope has the last and the longest of the dramatic monologues. The result of this monologue is that Count Guido Franceschini is executed. He's condemned to death, and he is executed. The Ring and the Book is a very interesting book because it is practically at the crossroads between tradition and modernity. We have the multiple point of view here. So practically several people speaking from their own perspective about one and the same event. It is the same technique that we find in the case of William Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White, except that here we talk about poetry and the fact that we talk about a dramatic monologue. So, Robert Browning wrote very many poems, and very many of them are quite difficult, and you have to know a lot about, you even have to know about Shakespeare. He has a poem about Caliban that appears in Shakespeare's play The Tempest. So practically, you have to have educational background in order to be able to understand the poems. Very, very often, the poems present a distorted psychology. So, kind of a very special typology, the typology of criminals, the typology of murderers, the typology of villains, and of bad people, bad priests, bad wives, bad husbands, bad nobility, and whatnot. And the characters represent human drives, so practically is human tendencies. It is this very, very human typology, whether during Renaissance times or modern times. Now, reading a poem made by Robert Browning is something very difficult, as I told you, because sometimes he changes his point of view. The perspective is different. So at certain moments, we don't know who's speaking. In the poems I analyzed, they are easy ones. We know exactly who's speaking. There are other poems when the points of view changes, the focus changes. So sometimes we have real reality, particular observation, and sometimes we have transcendental truth. We have philosophy, we have aphorisms of religion, and sometimes Robert Browning is very ironic. And here we have two levels of understanding. Sometimes he tries to use colloquial language. Sometimes it is the kind of English which is not so commonly used, because he tries to associate the way the characters speak with real speech. And let us not forget what I said at the beginning, the intellectual touch. The fact that in order to understand a poem by Robert Browning, you have to be very, very cultivated. But anyway, he's one of the greatest poets, not only of Victorian times, but also of English poetry. This my presentation is over, and I have to thank you for your attention.